Tonight, when you get up to use the bathroom, you won't even think about it. You'll flick a switch, and for less than the cost of a coin, the entire room will fill with light. No thought, no fear, no ritual, just light. Now imagine that switch doesn't exist. Imagine the only thing standing between you and total darkness is a candle you have to guard from the wind, or a fire you have to feed all night long, or nothing at all. For more than 5,000 years of city life, that wasn't imagination. That was Tuesday night. We think of darkness as an inconvenience today, something that slows down a late-night drive or makes you fumble for our phone. But for most of human history, darkness was something closer to a second world, a world with its own laws, its own dangers, and its own strange, flickering beauty. And the story of how cities survived it, how they fought it, feared it, priced it, and eventually conquered it, is one of the strangest chapters in the story of civilization. Here's the part that sounds made up, but isn't. In parts of medieval Europe, being caught outside after dark without a light in your hand wasn't just risky. It was treated as evidence of criminal intent. Not walking with a friend after dark, not visiting a sick relative. Just darkness itself, unaccompanied by fire, was enough to get you arrested, sometimes on sight, sometimes on suspicion alone. Entire cities rang bells every evening, a sound called the couvre-feu, literally cover the fire, the origin of our word curfew. At that signal, thousands of people in unison across an entire city smothered their hearths and blew out their lamps. On command, every single night. Try to picture that. A city of tens of thousands of people choosing, together, to go dark. Why would any civilization do that to itself? That leaves us with two questions worth sitting with for the next 20 minutes. First, if going outside at night was this dangerous, this restricted, this feared, how did cities function at all after sunset? Someone still had to bake the morning bread. Someone still had to give birth, put out a fire, deliver urgent news, bury the dead. Night didn't pause human need. So how did it work? Second, what changed the human relationship with darkness itself? Because somewhere between the curfew bell and your bathroom light switch, humanity didn't just find a new tool. It fundamentally rewired how it felt about nighttime. Fear became convenience. Threat became romance. How does that kind of shift even happen? Here's the bigger idea sitting underneath all of this. Light has never really been about seeing. It's about control. Control over time, over fear, over who gets to move freely and who has to stay hidden. Every civilization that has ever tried to push back the night wasn't just chasing comfort. It was chasing power over the one thing that has always ignored human authority, the rotation of the earth. This is the story of that fight, and by the end of it, you'll never look at a streetlight the same way again. Before we go back in time, a quick flash of what's ahead. A Roman night watchman freezing in an alley, listening for fire. A boy in London selling light itself, one torch at a time, to strangers who'd rather pay him than walk in the dark alone. A king in Paris, so afraid of his own city at night that he redesigns it house by house. A gas explosion that terrifies an entire country and convinces it to light up anyway. A wartime blackout that plunges cities back into medieval darkness, on purpose, out of fear of bombs. And finally, a single flipped switch that changes what night even means forever. All of it real. All of it coming up. Let's start in ancient Rome, a city of roughly 1 million people at its height, a population number Europe wouldn't see again in one city for over 1,000 years. Daylight in Rome was for the wealthy. Nighttime in Rome belonged to everyone else. Here's why. Roman streets were so jammed with carts, animals, and foot traffic that Julius Caesar himself banned wheeled vehicles from the city center during daylight hours. The result? All deliveries, all transport, all heavy labor got pushed into the night. Rome's night wasn't quiet. It was loud, chaotic, and pitch black all at once. Hidden revelation. Rome actually created one of history's first dedicated night safety forces, the Vigiles. But they weren't originally police. They were firefighters. Emperor Augustus formed them after a series of catastrophic fires. Because in a city built largely of wood, with open flames as the only source of light, fire wasn't a risk. It was a mathematical certainty. Night in Rome meant living inside a giant tinderbox that everyone was, ironically, forced to keep lighting on purpose. So a Roman citizen walking home at night faced a brutal trade-off: carry no light and risk breaking your neck on a rut in the road or getting robbed in the dark, or carry a torch and risk being the reason the entire street burns down. There was no good option, only less bad ones. This fear of fire didn't just shape Roman knights, it shaped Roman law itself, and centuries later, it would shape an entire continent's approach to darkness. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and you meet a young apprentice we'll call Edmund, a fictional stand-in for thousands of real city dwellers whose names never made it into any record, but whose lives followed this same pattern almost exactly. Edmund lives in a walled city. Every evening, just after sunset, a bell tolls from the cathedral tower. This is the couvre-feu, the curfew. At that sound, Edmund's entire household smothers the hearth fire, and the city gates are locked from the inside. Why such extreme control? Two brutal, practical reasons. First, fire. A single unattended flame could burn down a city built almost entirely of timber and thatch, and many did. Second, control. Medieval authorities genuinely believed, and had real evidence to back it up, that darkness was when crime, rebellion, and disorder took root. Night became something the state didn't just fear, it regulated. Hidden revelation. In many medieval towns, if you absolutely had to go outside after curfew, you weren't just allowed to carry a light, you were often legally required to. Moving through the dark, unlit, wasn't seen as brave. It was seen as suspicious, almost criminal in itself, because only someone with something to hide would refuse to be seen. This is where our first real night economy job appears, the link boy. For a coin, a poor boy carrying a burning torch, called a link, would walk ahead of you through the unlit streets, lighting your path and, just as importantly, making you visible to any night watchman who might otherwise assume the worst about a stranger moving in shadow. And that need to be seen, not just to see, is the thread that pulls us into the next chapter. In a city about to make darkness a matter of national pride. The year is 1667. Paris is, by reputation, one of the most dangerous cities in Europe after dark. A place where robbery and violence in unlit alleys had become so common that residents openly feared their own streets. Enter Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, a real historical figure appointed by King Louis XIV as the head of a brand new position, Lieutenant General of Police. La Reynie's mandate wasn't just to catch criminals, it was to redesign how an entire city experienced night itself. His solution sounds almost absurdly simple today. He ordered thousands of lanterns, candle-powered, hung on ropes strung across the streets, to be installed throughout Paris. Hidden revelation. This wasn't charity, and it wasn't really even about crime fighting in the way we'd think of it. It was psychological warfare against darkness itself. La Reynie understood something modern criminologists still study today, that visible light doesn't just help you see danger, it changes how people behave. Because they know they can be seen too, the impact was immediate enough that Paris started to earn a nickname that has stuck for over 350 years. La Ville Lumière, the City of Light, long before the Eiffel Tower ever lit up. That title was earned by candlelit lanterns swaying over muddy streets, guarded by men whose entire job was to keep a city's fragile little flames from dying. But candlelight has limits. It's expensive, it's dim, and it burns out. Paris had proven a city could choose to fight the dark. But the real revolution needed a completely different kind of fire. Jump ahead to London, early 1800s, and meet a man named Frederick Windsor, a real inventor obsessed with a strange, flammable byproduct of burning coal, gas. Windsor believed this gas, piped underground through iron tubes, could deliver flame to an entire street from a single central source. No torches, no individual candles, no link boys running door to door. Just turn a valve and fire appears. In 1807, Windsor lit a portion of Pall Mall in London using gas lamps as a public demonstration. It worked, and it terrified people almost as much as it amazed them. Hidden revelation. Many Londoners genuinely believed piping invisible, explosive gas underneath an entire city was a form of madness. Some predicted the whole city would detonate. Newspapers ran skeptical, even mocking commentary, and they weren't entirely wrong to be nervous. Gaslighting did come with real explosions and fires in its early decades as the technology was refined. But the economic and social pressure was enormous. A gaslit street meant shops could stay open later. Factories could run night shifts. Streets that had once emptied at dusk now stayed populated and safer. Statistically, because darkness had always been correlated with crime, and light pushed that fear back. By the 1820s, gaslighting had spread through London, then Paris, then cities across Europe and America. For the first time in human history, night in a major city started to look less like a retreat into danger and more like an extension of the day. And that shift, night becoming an extension of the day, is exactly what set the stage for humanity's final, decisive break with darkness altogether. By the late 1800s, arc lighting and then incandescent bulbs, pushed forward by figures like Thomas Edison and countless less famous engineers, began replacing gas across major cities. Electric light was cleaner, safer, brighter, and, critically, it didn't consume the air around it the way flame did. Hidden revelation: one of the most overlooked effects of electric street lighting wasn't safety or convenience. It was time itself. Before reliable artificial light, human sleep patterns were often naturally split into two phases across the night, with a period of quiet wakefulness in between. Documented in historical diaries and letters, cheap, abundant electric light, combined with industrial work schedules, helped flatten that pattern into the single continuous block of sleep most of us now think of as normal. Electric light didn't just push back the dark, it quietly rewired the human body clock on a civilizational scale. And there's a strange, sobering coda to this story worth knowing. In the 20th century, during wartime, cities that had spent generations conquering the night were suddenly forced to plunge themselves back into it deliberately. Wartime blackouts across European and Asian cities during global conflicts required entire populations to cover windows and extinguish visible light, specifically to make cities invisible and safe from above. For a few terrifying years, humanity chose to go back to the dark on purpose, because in the age of the airplane, light itself had become a target. Which brings us finally back to you. Darkness was never empty. It was just unlit. Every civilization has at some point decided that light is worth dying for or killing for. A candle didn't just hold back the dark, it held back suspicion. Night wasn't canceled by electricity, it was just finally invited inside. For most of human history, the bravest thing you could do after sunset was simply walk outside. So think about that switch by your bed again. When you flip it tonight, you're not just turning on a bulb. You're closing a loop that started with a Roman firefighter watching a wooden rooftop in the dark, with a bell ringing over a medieval town, ordering an entire population to smother their own fires out of fear, with a French police chief hanging candlelit lanterns to convince his city it was safe to exist after sunset, with a London inventor piping invisible gas under the streets, while his neighbors braced for an explosion that, mostly, never came. Every uneventful walk you take at night, to your car, to a late-night store, to a friend's front door, is something that would have seemed almost unbelievable to a city dweller just 200 years ago. Not because the walk is impressive, but because no one is afraid of it. That absence of fear is not natural. It's not automatic. It's the end result of thousands of years of trial, failure, fire, and stubborn human effort to push back one very old, very patient enemy, the dark. So next time the power flickers, and your street goes black for even 30 seconds, pay attention to that flash of unease you feel. That feeling is old. It's ancient, actually. It's the same feeling Edmund felt when the curfew bell rang. The same feeling a Roman citizen felt, torch in hand, listening for footsteps in an unlit alley. We didn't get rid of that fear. We just built enough light to keep it mostly at bay.